Earlier this week, we told you about the $7.5 million included in the state's supplemental budget that will fund 5 low-barrier shelters in Maine.
But as News Center Maine Ryan Wooten tells us, other shelters in the state that were counting on receiving government funds are now scrambling to find private donations after a separate funding bill failed.
It's difficult to have a budget where you're projecting the generosity of people giving money.
But that's what many homeless shelters in Maine are forced to do. Bangor Area Homeless Shelter Director Boyd Cronholm was counting on the passing of a $10 million funding bill that would have been split between shelters in Maine, helping fill critical funding gaps across the state.
On the last day, there were a few legislatures that said, I thought we already funded the shelters. And you did. You funded 1/3 of them, low barriers, and low barriers play an important part.
But shelters like Cronholm's don't fall in that category.
At this point, we're looking at how we're going to sustain the cost of keeping these shelters open.
It's a similar situation in southern Maine. Megan Jean Gendron is the director at the York County Shelter in Alfred. Both Bangor Area Homeless Shelter and York County shelters have a yearly $1 million budget. But both shelters receive $300,000 or less in annual government funding, forced to search high and low for the remaining dollars.
We don't know where this funding will come from.
Jean Gendron says York County Shelter's doors are only open because an unexpected $500,000 donation walked in, which will carry them to July, but not a mile further.
We are having to look at alternate staffing plans. We are having to look at emergency financial infusions.
With the cost of fuel, wages, and overhead all continuously going up, Senator Joe Baldacci, who has pushed for bills that fund shelters, says allowing shelters to be constantly at risk of closing due to low funding is not the answer.
It's going to be continual, that they're going to have a broad spectrum, public and private donors to support them.
Shelter directors say they're not asking for the state to fully fund shelters, but they are asking for something consistent and substantial. In Bangor, Ryan Wooten, News Center Maine.
The executive director at York County Shelter Program says the shelter's expenses have increased by 30% since the COVID-19 pandemic.